And what I came to discover is that in our culture, we have a surplus of information available to us, and yet we also have a health deficit. And so my curiosity is towards how to bridge that gap. And there was this intuitive sense that each one of us has inside of us a guide, a compass, an inner teacher that is wanting to lead us towards choices that are both soul and body nurturing, but somehow that the voice of this inner compass, this inner guide, call it our soul, has gotten drowned out by the noise of our conditioning, of our beliefs, of all of the information out there, and the belief that the information is going to come from outside of us. And so I began to explore that more and more in my work, and eventually it has led to the development of something that I call soul coaching. And so soul is just a word that essentially identifies this inner compass, this inner knowing, this inner guide. And this inner guidance system is available to us in literally every aspect of our life. But because I myself have had such a passion around health, and there's this recognition that the health of the body is such a boon to our authentic expression, is such a boon to our capacity to show up in our lives, in our relationships with as much vitality as we need to really be there and to really be of service and to enjoy ourselves too. So one of the things that I find when I'm working with clients and also students, because I've been training nutritionists and yoga teachers for many years as well, is that there's this frustration around this gap that I'm speaking about between what we know we should be doing and what we actually are doing. And I think there's this kind of belief in our culture that we just need to be more motivated, or we just need to line things up a little bit better, or control ourselves a little bit better in order, or get a little bit more disciplined in order to get things going. And I have found that that is not actually the way. It can be a temporary help and it can temporarily kind of put us on track. But I believe that there is a much more effortless way, that there's this outpouring of self-care that is constantly coming from within us, that guides us to the various choices that we're making. And in fact, this word effortless that I'm using, I really mean that. It's like there's a sense of no longer making choices from the mind, but essentially it's just happening through us. There's something else that begins to move through us that is making the choices. And so you can well imagine that it's going to be important to let go of our concepts and our beliefs. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move through the evening. But it's about orienting ourselves towards other aspects of our being that want to contribute to our well-being. So most of us are referring primarily to our minds for our choices and our decisions. And the encouragement here is going to be to bring in more of your faculties, because your body wants to have a say, your feelings want to have a say, your soul, your heart want to have a say. And so we can learn how to listen to all of these aspects of our being. And then when they line up, that is kind of a straightaway for the soul to kind of come through. So if the body is saying one thing and the mind is saying something else and the emotions yet something else, we have this kind of lack of coherence, which then makes it very difficult for the soul's voice to come through. And so essentially we're looking to align our whole being with soul, with whatever is true for us. And it's in that environment that this outpouring of soul energy comes through, which may not necessarily line up with our beliefs, but may surprise us in terms of its wisdom and its intelligence and the way that it knows what is best for us. So essentially tonight, and as we move into the 4-week course, my question to you is, are you ready to let this inner expert, this inner compass, have a chance to guide you on a more consistent basis? Are you ready to learn how to do that and to give yourself the time and the space and the curiosity and the openness to see what happens when we begin to rely less on our mind and more on this inner flow of intuitive guidance? So one of the things that I want to make really clear is that although I'm speaking about like a soul-guided self-care, there is no perfect way of doing this. So what I'm saying is that soul-guided self-care isn't perfect self-care. It doesn't mean that, oh, as soon as I get this all lined up, I'm going to be making all the right choices, because in terms of the soul, there really are no right and wrong choices. Everything that we choose, everything that we experience is essentially feedback for our system. So it's really just a question of beginning to be willing to trust and orient yourself towards listening more closely to the soul, letting yourself miss the mark, but using that missing of the mark as an additional source of information that brings you closer and closer in line with what is authentic and what is nurturing for you moment to moment. So there are essentially 3 primary ways, as far as I can tell, that we make choices. And here we're, of course, speaking primarily of choices that we make in terms of our self-care of the body, and also care of our mind, of our souls, because a lot of people also struggle, for example, with having a regular meditation practice or going to yoga class regularly, or even maybe just taking regular walks in nature, which is something we probably all know would be good for us, but yet somehow we can't quite get ourselves out the door. So there are 3 ways, as far as I can tell, which is, the first one is conditioning. So conditioning, what I mean by that is that many of the choices that we make have been programmed into our subconscious mind from the very beginning of our time here. So many of the food choices that we make, for example, if we don't consciously give ourselves the opportunity to have input, many of the food choices we make are coming from this programmed place. Maybe what we were raised on, maybe we've been programmed by advertising, by the media, maybe we've been programmed by Canada's Food Guide, or by some expert that we have enjoyed and felt inspired by. And so we begin to just follow what it is that they might be guiding us to do, or maybe whatever the new dietary trend is. So there's a lot of unconscious programming that is happening, or that is being followed, and that is really guiding most of our choices most of the time. We may think we're being conscious, but actually scientists have shown that 95% of our choices and our interpretations, our decisions, are coming from the subconscious brain. And so far more than we are aware of. And to a great extent, I always find that all you need to do is to go to a grocery store and look at people's carts, and maybe even your own cart, and to see that a lot of the stuff that we're doing is just sort of automatic. We're not consciously thinking about what's good for us, or what might make us more vital. It's more like habit in a way. So the second way in which we can make choices with respect to our lifestyle is education. So I'm sure all of us who are here have reached out to learn information from external experts, maybe following certain books or following certain programs, following certain cleanses for a while. And we experience what that does to our body. And education is a really great way of breaking free of some of the programming that we have taken on as human beings, because the books that we reach for and the experts that we reach for often are presenting us with ideas that are going beyond what our limited view of what might be possible for us is. And so education can be a really great way of opening us up to new possibilities. And many times we get some really good results from trying new things. The problem with education, as you've probably experienced, is that one, sometimes experts, and maybe even often, experts are saying different things. So education can be very confusing because we could perhaps look at the opinion of 10 different experts of how to heal a digestive issue, for example, and they might be all saying different things. In fact, sometimes very different things. High fat, low fat, no animal products, animal products, fruit, no fruit, grains, no grains, these supplements, no these supplements, so it can get very, very confusing. So there are limitations to education and to relying on external input for our choices. And so this is where the third way of making choices and decisions for ourselves, for our bodies, for our souls comes in, and that is intuition. So intuition is an inner knowing that doesn't necessarily align with what we have believed in the past. It might even be a surprising kind of outpouring that comes forward, or kind of it can be an inner inclination that just kind of feels like a yes in our body. Everybody experiences intuition in different ways, but I see intuition as being the voice of the soul. It's a knowing that comes without actually knowing, without actually receiving information. And I think we all, of course, have experienced hearing our intuition and listening to it or not listening to it, and the effects of that. But what I am speaking about here is relying more and more on intuition as this inner expert that has the capacity to help us to bring peace to our lifestyle choices on an ongoing basis. And intuition also helps us to choose the various pieces that we're going to bring into our own unique health plan. So I'm not saying here that we're not going to refer to experts anymore. We're just going to use our intuition. Intuition is actually a wonderful way of deciding which expert to believe, right? Because when we're listening to someone or when we're choosing a book, there can be this inner sense of yes, right, in our body, in our heart, in our gut, right? But if we're entirely in our mind, we may kind of be coerced by a very sharp mind, or maybe the external, it seems very scientific and all of that. The guy's wearing a white lab coat. He's got a stethoscope around his neck. He must really know what he's talking about. So we can be swayed if we're only using the mind to make these choices. So intuition can help us to determine which experts to use, which practitioners to help to guide us and to assist us on our journey. We can use intuition even when we are choosing a certain dietary plan and we're thinking about what to have for dinner, there's just this inner sense of, we can learn to hone into, oh, I need something light tonight, or I need something heavier or warm or cooked or raw. So intuition can begin to help us to refine within perhaps the health plan that we've already chosen. I find too that intuition comes to the foreground when I'm shopping sometimes, where I might have a list of foods that I have chosen or that I've written down on my list. And then as I walk through the store, there's something over there that just kind of lights up. And it's like my body and the food are kind of talking to each other. And there's a sense of that this would be a good food for me at this time, whether it's good for my physical body, whether it's got nutrients that I need currently, or whether there's a kind of a spiritual or an emotional component to that food that might be just the perfect thing to help to release a certain emotion that is currently being integrated into my system. And so I love that. I love how intuitive guidance is coming from all around us all the time. But again, if we're either going too fast or we're very, very kind of concentrated in our minds, we will miss that voice, because the voice of intuition is quite quiet. We need to be still. We need to be relatively quiet. We need to let go of the voice of the mind for a little bit, which tends to be very loud. And this is why I encourage people to find practices and to incorporate practices into their lives that allow them to get quiet. And that could be meditation, but it could also be other things as well. And I'm sure you've all found that when you are doing quieter things, your capacity or these little sparks of intuition come in much more easily. So when you are maybe just quietly chopping vegetables in the kitchen, and then there's just these ideas that come in, or when you are taking a quiet walk in nature. Certainly it's not usually when the TV's on, or when we're listening to the radio, or maybe in a conversation, or just kind of busily getting through our days, that intuition can really kind of make it through. So this encouragement to slow down and to learn to orient towards the voice of the soul is also really important in all of this. So to me, intuition is essentially when the body and the mind and the feelings and the soul are all in agreement, they're all aligned. So oftentimes what's happening for us, and the reason we get frustrated or we struggle with our health choices, is because the mind is going in one direction. It wants one thing, or it thinks something should be happening. And then the body might actually need something totally different than what the mind is saying, right? And then on top of that, there may also be some emotions that have not had a chance to integrate, that are creating a lot of resistance in the system. And so this creates a discordance that prevents that voice of the soul from flowing through. So in terms of the body, one of the key starting points, I believe, when we are wanting to encourage effortless self-care, is this understanding that the body is our ally in all of this. It's not the enemy, even though it might have symptoms right now. It doesn't need to be coerced into doing anything, right? We seem to think that we need to sort of take control of the body and make it heal or make it do something. But the understanding that actually the body is embodied spirit, and it has all the wisdom and the love and the intelligence of the spiritual realm, because it is spiritual. It's just dense spirituality. And so that's the first orientation that I think is so key to begin with is that my body is my ally. My body already has this capacity to heal itself. And more than anything, what I need to do as the body's owner is to rekindle trust in my body. And so we don't necessarily need to, you don't have to believe what I'm saying here. I'm not asking you to just, jump from where you are to complete trust in your physical body. It's a process. But we need to experience for ourselves that the body actually is such a willing ally on this journey. And one of the things that we can do, say, for example, if you have a symptom right now, or an illness, or just maybe a lack of energy, whatever is going on in your body, rather than trying to fix that or trying to find solutions to that or looking outside of you for answers, the encouragement is to just stop for a moment, to slow down and take a breath, and then turn the antenna inwards. What better place to find out how to best take care of the body than the body itself? So I turn towards this physical body, and there's this attitude of respect, of openness, of availability, and this kind of a question that we drop in, which is, how can I help? What is it that you need from me? Right? So we're orienting towards creating a deeper and deeper friendship with our body. And once we begin to do that, we're often very surprised by the amount of information that begins to come forward, both in the moment, but also as we start navigating our lives. Just that turning the antenna inwards consciously begins to create that kind of inner awareness, even as we're out there in the world. So we can be out there in the world, right? So the antennae are out, but they're also in at the same time. And so simultaneously, we're functioning, we're doing, but we're also listening. And this creates a scenario where the body can really feed us ongoing information. And then we can actually begin to develop a greater trust with each other, right? So it's not just us who's lost trust in the body. The body in some ways has lost trust in us, right? So when we're feeding the body things that just don't serve it, that don't feel good, that take away its energy, that create inflammation, that are very difficult to digest, the body actually begins to mistrust, if I can use that word, us, right? So there's this whole rekindling of the relationship that needs to happen slowly but surely, just like it would happen in any relationship where the trust has been broken or where the trust has not been really developed. So it's this willingness to re-engage that intimacy with the body and to learn to listen, and also to have conversations with the body. So this is the place where we start with this effortless self-care. The second thing that I think is really important to look at and to be open to is the fact that we likely have quite a number of beliefs that we're holding right now, again, many of them subconscious, that are actually going counter to our finding this place of effortless self-care. So we may not be aware of it, but we may hold the belief that we just can't do it. We may hold the belief that we're just not disciplined enough. Also, maybe we believe that because our family won't do it with us, that we won't be able to do it, that we need their help in order to be able to do this. Some people might say or have this belief that they just don't have the energy, or they feel overwhelmed, or they need to be more motivated. So we have all these beliefs about what it's going to take to get me from here to effortless self-care. And it's well worth questioning all these beliefs. So one, identifying the beliefs that might be getting between us and our healthier and healthier and more radiant body. And once we have identified them, and we'll be spending the whole second week of this primer course looking at that and how to identify the beliefs, and then how to question them, and where do they live in the body, so that you can begin to open up to what's actually true of yourself and of your body. So for example, a lot of people might believe that they need to be more motivated or more disciplined in order to take better care of themselves. And I haven't really found that to be the case. Motivation and discipline are actually natural qualities of the soul. So we don't need to be more motivated or disciplined, because it's already here in each one of us. Of course, the soul wants to live in a healthy body. Of course, it wants that. Of course, it wants to guide us towards that. So it's not really a lack of discipline or motivation that's happening. It's a lack of soul connection that's happening. And once we can open up that communication with the soul, then the qualities that are inherent to the soul will come forth to assist us in the choices that we're making. So the soul is naturally kind. It doesn't tend to criticize us when we do miss the mark. The soul is naturally motivated and disciplined. It's naturally loving towards the body. It's intuitive. It makes authentic choices. So these things will all naturally start flowing forward once we begin to possibly identify and question the beliefs that we might have around why it is that we're not currently taking good care of ourselves. The other thing that I think is extremely important to look at when we are longing to develop effortless self-care is the emotions. So in this moment, as you listen and you think about your current state of self-care, what feelings predominate for you? Is it confusion? Is it frustration? Is it overwhelm? Is it apathy? Is it irritation around your family that aren't supporting you, or that kind of seem to be pulling you off the wagon? And the key thing with emotions is to realize that we have a belief that emotions get in the way of us doing the right things for ourselves, taking good care of ourselves. But the orientation in the world of soul coaching is that all of the emotions that you're currently feeling around self-care are not only not in the way, they are the way. So when you think about your current self-care status, and you think about whatever it is, that whatever emotion arises there, frustration, overwhelm, whatever, where do you feel that in your body? right? So often we'll feel it somewhere along the center line of the body, maybe some tension somewhere as well. But a lot of times it's the chakras that will start getting activated. So as I'm connecting to the group here, I'm feeling some throat, pretty strong in the solar plexus as well, some heart too. It may be elsewhere for you, but that's what I'm noticing here. And so the invitation is actually to turn towards these energies, right? So when you have a challenge and energies are evoked, they're evoked because life is saying, in order to see your way clearly through this challenge, what is needed is to acknowledge and open to and liberate these feelings. These feelings are actually sitting right on top of your intuitive knowing. And so they're not in the way, they actually need to be open to be welcomed in a sense. So that, and once you do begin to open to them in that way, what that does is it gives the emotion more space to move in. Because usually when we feel an emotion around something, our energy is spent trying to resist because we think, I need to get rid of this overwhelm in order for me to take better care of myself, right? And so I need to get rid of is a pushing against. And so now you're caging that overwhelm in even more. So instead, it's like, oh, I feel overwhelmed. Okay, open to that. Maybe this is here to help me. And so I bring my attention to this feeling of overwhelm with just curiosity and openness, kindness. And as the space kind of expands around it, the energy starts moving more because it's got more room, right, in its cage. And eventually, the door just opens up and it can completely liberate itself, leaving in its wake inspiration, motivation, clarity, creativity. So we'll be spending our third week looking deeply at emotions and how to meet those. We'll be looking specifically at the ones that you're dealing with in your life right now, because I want the course to be as practical as possible. I don't want to just feed your brain with information. I want us to have experiences of navigating our inner world and experiencing the clarity that comes when we begin to orient towards this inner compass. The other thing that I think is really important when it comes to learning effortless self-care, or maybe not so much learning, but relearning or activating effortless self-care, is that relationships are also here to help us. So very often there's this sense of struggle with particular relationships. Maybe around self-care, it could be our struggle with food or certain addictions that seem to be getting in the way. It could be a struggle around a relationship with someone in our life that doesn't support us. It could be a struggle around a relationship with our own body, with our symptoms, with our emotions. So everything is relationship essentially. And as we learn about self-care, we can begin to be curious about the relationships where there's struggle, where there's a lack of harmony. And we can use the relationship again as a doorway into the voice of the soul. So there is not a single relationship that is preventing you from accessing effortless self-care. When we see our relationships as simply a mirror for what's going on here, a mirror for where the voice of the soul has been silenced, then every relationship, both the easy and the challenging ones, becomes a way of getting to know ourselves better and becomes a way of turning up the volume of the voice of our intuition. So we're doing a whole week on relationships as well in this course. One of the things that I also wanted to speak about this evening, I'm going to do a screen share here, is something that I think maybe very few of us are aware of, although I have spoken about this a fair bit in the Soul Coach training course that I teach. But I think it's an important thing to understand. So what we've got up here on the screen is the same person. On the left-hand side is, this woman, and the squiggly lines, the dark lines, are essentially areas of blocked energy in her body. So everything is energy, including our bodies, and all of the holistic traditions essentially teach us that health is free-flowing energy. Health is the liberation of any of these stagnant or blocked energies in our body, so that the life force can reach all of our tissues, can reach our minds, can reach our emotional bodies, can fuel our souls. And yet over the course of our lives, what happens for all of us is that due to the experiences that we have and our incapacity to really feel our way through those experiences if they were too intense, or if we weren't encouraged to really feel, and most of us weren't encouraged to feel fully, we end up suppressing certain emotional energies in our body, and we get what we have in this little picture on the left-hand side. So there's no two ways about it. This is happening in all of us. Now, on the right-hand side, I've drawn the same lady, and she's now perhaps eating better. So I've drawn that little apple there, and she has improved her nutrition habits. And what this has done is it has expanded her energy field. So anytime we begin to adopt more soul nurturing practices, those practices, and body nurturing practices as well, those practices essentially increase our vibration. And that's what I'm trying to indicate with the broadening of the energy field there. So whether it's breath work, or whether it's spending time in nature, or having some energy work sessions done, or meditating, or eating a cleaner diet, or just the multitude of things that we can do to self-care, there's always going to be an expansion of the energy field, which is great. And that's why at first we feel very vibrant and alive and energized, and maybe we'll find an alleviation of some of our symptoms. And then invariably what will happen is that a week or two into it, we might wake up one morning and there's this overwhelming feeling of heaviness or sadness, or anger starts moving through, and we don't really quite understand what's happening, and we may not even consciously kind of be aware of it. And we find ourselves just not doing our meditation practice that morning, because the last thing we want to do is to sit still in the midst of this anger or this irritation. We may find that we reach for a heavier breakfast that we may be used to enjoy instead of our smoothie, because we need something to kind of numb and soothe this intense feeling that's moving to the surface. And essentially what has happened is that the dense emotions that are sitting on the bottom of our pond, so to speak, begin to move to the surface as a result of our energy field expanding. And this is a good thing, because one, the health of the body is reliant on energy moving and flowing freely. Two, our connection with our soul is greater the less of these obstructions that we have in the field. So anytime we adopt body or soul nurturing practices, there will be a movement of energy. And generally, these energies don't go quietly. They come to the surface and they spend some time in our field. So if anger is arising, what is needed there is, one, the recognition that actually this is a good thing because it's moving its way out of the system, whereas it might have been deep in the system, interfering with the function of our organs or interfering with our capacity to feel alive or to feel our creativity. And so the fact that it's moving out means that it will eventually create a state of greater clarity, of greater connection with our deepest selves. But we don't know that, right? We don't know that when the anger comes to the surface. And we've been so programmed around good and bad emotions that there's just an automatic tendency to start wanting to shut them down again, which is why we tend to then go back to our old way of being. And I think this explains why it's so hard for us to keep moving forward in our health journey, because we don't understand that actually the system is going to detoxify emotionally as a result of us making better choices. And yet, when we feel these feelings come up, the tendency is to believe that we've done something wrong on a conscious level or even subconscious. And also the tendency is to go towards habits that feel more kind of that shut us down a little bit, because we don't know how to feel feelings openly and with that kind of generosity of presence that is possible, but that takes time to develop. So when we understand that this is happening, I think it's really a key thing, because it helps us to see that when we have feelings coming through after we've begun to make some positive changes, that it's actually a good thing. It's part of the process. It's what we want. And all that we need is to create as much openness towards what's moving through, and also to pull out from our toolboxes. I know we all have toolboxes, whether that's journaling or speaking to a friend or dancing or taking a bath, but whatever we need to do to allow ourselves to relax in the process of this movement of energy that's going through. And it's such a key thing, because this is the point. This is kind of a really important point where we could either be still, allow the feelings to move through, or go unconscious and move backwards, right? I mean, we're never essentially moving totally backwards, but I think you know what I mean, where we get on these really good grooves and then all of a sudden we don't even understand why, but somehow we're back into old habits. And this is the answer to why is it that I'm not able to do what I know I should be doing. It's that when you're doing what you should be doing, it doesn't always feel good emotionally. But that doesn't mean that it's bad, right? So it's about beginning to reorient towards our emotional beings as essentially every emotion is sacred. Every emotion is sacred. Every emotion is here to liberate itself. It knows how to liberate itself. And your body and soul nurturing practices are actually encouraging that. So your emotional state is not a measure of how well you're doing. In fact, a lot of times when we make great changes to our health choices, quite intense feelings can move through. But if we can begin to see that that is actually a positive thing, and the less we resist, the more elegantly these feelings can move through, then we have this possibility of continuing to orient towards greater spaciousness for our moments just as they are, greater openness to new possibilities for ourselves and for our bodies, greater fluidity in our emotional bodies, which helps us, but it also helps everyone around us, and greater access to the clarity of our soul.